Welcome to the Episcopal Church of the Holy Communion. Thank you for joining us for this sermon. You can find all of our sermons at holycommunion.net and our Facebook, YouTube, and podcast channels. Consider hitting like or subscribe. Consider sharing this sermon with others. It helps us to reach more people like you. We are so thankful to those who support our ministry. You can give today at holycommunion.net/give.
Like dreamers. Shir hama'alot b'shuv Adonai et shivat Zion hayinu kecholmim. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like dreamers. I have to admit that while this is a text that I know quite well, it's not a text I've ever studied, and it's certainly not a text I've ever preached. Because in the Jewish tradition, this is a text that we pray, and we pray it often. Psalm 126 is used as part of the grace after meals, the prayer of thanks that we say at the conclusion of every meal. And we add this psalm on every festive occasion. We sing it together at the end of our Sabbath meals and on every holiday, after weddings, and at the conclusion of meals that celebrate the birth of a new baby. Shir hama'alot b'shuv Adonai et shivat Zion hayinu kecholmim. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like dreamers. This morning, I want to delve just a bit deeper with you on what it truly means to dream. The entirety of the Hebrew Bible, the story of the early Israelites, is a journey from multiple forms of slavery to what the French Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas calls difficult freedom. Difficult because to be free is not the same thing as to be unencumbered. In fact, quite the opposite. In just 2 weeks, our Jewish community will celebrate the holiday of Passover, the holiday which marks the exodus from Egypt and the great wonders and miracles that God performed in making Israel God's people. The Israelites escaped unfathomable suffering, and after a week of fleeing, and then watching their oppressors chase after them with chariots and horses and a massive army, the Israelites reached the sea. Trapped between drowning in front of them and war and capture behind them, the people cry out in desperation. And God splits the sea. The people cross over on dry land. They look behind them and see the Egyptians follow, and the waters return, drowning the entire Egyptian army. And our rabbis teach us that it was in this moment that freedom finally occurred. In this moment when the people no longer had to live in fear, this moment when they saw that their suffering had truly come to an end. For them, freedom meant an end to suffering and oppression, but not an end to responsibility. Because what immediately follows the exodus from Egypt is the giving of the Torah, the law. We are finally a free people, but we are not free to worship other gods. We are not free to murder or to steal. We are not free to reap from the corners of our fields, which must be left for the poor. We are not free to hold on to debts beyond the Jubilee year. To be a truly free people is to be encumbered, precisely because my liberation is dependent upon yours. I want to be very careful and hopefully very clear with my language here, because in our modern concept of freedom, we often talk about it as the freedom to do as we please. Governments not being allowed to limit us in ways that we choose to live our lives. Others not being allowed to infringe upon our personal choices. And we can have that society. In many ways, we do have that society. But here's the important thing to note. I can be free in this worldview only as an individual. Because the only way to live out this freedom is to forcibly make others subject to my dominion. If freedom is total, unconstrained freedom, then by definition, we cannot all be free. Because my complete freedom requires control over others. For us to be free as a people, for us all to be free, we require stern justice and infinite responsibility in the face of the other. Freedom is difficult, as Levinas teaches, precisely because it is bound to morality in all the concreteness of responsibility to and for the other person. To be free, then, is to see yourself as bound to the other, to recognize a shared responsibility to one another. And perhaps our greatest model of a person who was not enslaved but could not be free because his people were suffering was Moses. When God first appears to Moses, commanding Moses to call upon Pharaoh to free the Israelites, beginning our biblical story of liberation, Moses asks God what he should say when the people ask him, "What is God's name who sent him?" And God responds in perhaps one of the most confounding passages of our text. God answers, "Ehyeh asher ehyeh." This is a phrase that has confused scholars for centuries. The New International Version translates it as "I am who I am." But in fact, in the Hebrew, the text is in the future tense. Better translated as, "I will be what I will be." And God continues and says to Moses, "Ko tomar livnei Yisrael, ehyeh shalachani aleichem." Thus shall you say to the children of Israel, "Ehyeh, I will be, has sent me to you." As the late chief rabbi of Britain, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks teaches, God's name belongs in the future tense. God's call is to that which is not yet. And it is only those who can imagine the world other than it is who are truly capable of freedom. And that, I want to offer you this morning, that is what it is to dream. To hold hope and faith when all signs point to no. To look at the world and see not only what is, but what is possible. To see others not for what they can do for us, but what we can become together. To see the potential in our society, the potential in one another, and the potential in ourselves. And then to make that potential reality. To look to an unknown future is to recognize the divine. And to know that the world God created, the world that God gifted us, is capable of so much more. More goodness, more life, more love, more than what we see around us. And to see the divine manifest here on earth is to recognize that we are partners with God, not just in seeing that future, but in making it lived reality. Every one of us is part of history that has not yet been written. And we are anything but passive characters. We are co-authors, and we get to decide where this story goes. Because here's what's most amazing about Psalm 126. And the translators don't quite know what to do with it, and so we miss it in the English. Psalm 126 is not a story of the past. In fact, we don't believe it's happened yet. We say, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, but we still await that day. We talk about it as if it has happened because we believe the day will come, but it has not yet. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like dreamers. And the very next word in the Hebrew is as, which means then, in the future. Az yimale sechokpinu ulshonenu rina. Then our mouths shall be filled with laughter. Our tongues shall be filled with songs of joy. Az yomru vagoyim higdil Adonai la'asot im elah. Then shall they say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. To dream is to act as if the world that we know can be already is. A world in which every person is treated with dignity and respect, where every person can live their true lives, where every person has sufficient food and shelter, where every person feels safe and secure, where every person is truly free. That world does not await us in heaven. It is possible in the here and now, and we know that because God calls to Moses. God calls to Moses, and God tells Moses that it is up to us, to humanity, to be collaborators and co-conspirators in the fight towards freedom. Liberation does not come from God alone. It comes through humankind. It comes through Moses. It comes through us. And God tells Moses that the one who sent him, that the God of liberation, is the God that exists in the future tense. The world as we have it today is not the world as it should be, yet. In a society built on consumerism and culture of selfishness and immediate gratification, let us be the people who can see past ourselves. Let us be the people who can see past the now. Let us be the people who strive to build the society that God calls upon us to create. Let us be like dreamers.